Hi everyone, I made these rolling texture plates and I thought you might like to see how I made them. I basically have used this adhesive foam, which is a bit similar to what's used on like a foam stamp. It seems to pick up the paint really well on the gel plate. So I think I just got these ones from Spotlight, but you can get them everywhere, they're pretty cheap. And I've also just used the inner tube from, I think, a roll of Glad Wrap. I quite like them because they're pretty firm to press on. So I'm going to make 3 different rollers here, and this one I'm just using the black colour. I just chose the black colour so that it's easy to see the paper to peel off the back. And you're best to cut your pieces while the paper is still on there. I actually ruined a pair of scissors by doing it the other way around, which was very smart. But I'm just going to make a fairly, almost like a brick-like effect, but a bit irregular. So I've just cut different strips of the foam, different widths. They're all the same length, but different widths. And as you can see there, I'm just placing it on the roll, pressing it down quite firmly. This foam sticks really well. And then with my second piece, I'm just going to stick it next to the first piece, but I'm going to be a bit careful about where I start it because I want my gaps to be in different positions. So you can see I've got a gap there. So I'm going to make sure my gap is in a different position, just so when I roll it out on my plate, it's a little bit irregular where the gaps are. So it's just a matter of one after another. Some of them I cut into 2 pieces so that I had 2 gaps in that particular row, just to add another little bit of interest to the pattern. What I like about making these rollers is that they create a really good repeat pattern. So you don't have to cover a whole page with the foam. See how I've got the gaps in different places, and it looks quite interesting then when you roll it. But like I was saying, the repeat pattern's really great. And when you do a whole page of this, you see the pattern repeating and it looks really interesting. I'll just sped this up a little bit to show you the process. But you can see there I've got different thicknesses, I've got all my gaps in different places. And I think this is just the last piece that I'm putting on now. I kept checking all the time to make sure I sort of was alternating where the gaps were going, making sure the widths were a little bit varied between the strips of foam. It's all a little bit of experimentation because you don't really know how it's going to look until you roll it. So there you go, that's the finished one. And yeah, you just have to roll it on the plate like that for it to work, but I'll show you that a little bit later in the video. So that's one down. This second one, I decided to make it a bit more of a rounded pattern, so I just cut one of the sheets into quarters roughly. Again, make sure you keep the paper backing on while you're cutting it. And then I'm just going to cut this one into a spiral shape, sort of thinking, you know, that rose floral type pattern that you get with flowers, which will be useful in my prints, but you could do anything you liked. And then I just pulled a little bit of paper off the centre of the flower and placed it onto the tube. I stretched it out a little bit as I went around to sort of make sure that I liked the pattern that I was putting on there and make sure that the foam had gaps between each of the sections. And I just removed the paper as I went. It was actually pretty good. If I stuck it down and wasn't quite happy with it, I could pull it off, as long as I didn't leave it there for too long, pull it off and reposition it. Oh, I like the look of concentration on my face with the tongue sticking out. So just positioning that as I goes. A little bit hard to see on the video there, but it's getting a little bit tangled, but it worked quite quickly once I got the hang of it, and then I pulled all the paper off. And as you can see, I'm making sure that I've got a little bit of a gap in between each of the rows or each of the layers there. So I'm sort of going for a spiral effect and hoping that I get a rose or a flower type effect when I do it. So that's one there, and I'm thinking probably 3. So we'll just zoom through these next 2 so that you can see how it looks in the end. Again, I started the next one in a different position, so just remembering that I'm getting a repeat pattern and trying to imagine where the print will go as I'm rolling it. I don't want big gaps of paint left on the plate. I'd like there to be some sort of pattern on most areas, but that's entirely up to you. It's just up to your imagination. So you see they're positioned in 2 different places, and you can probably imagine where the third one will go. Really easy to use, this foam. I'm just using normal scissors, very cheap. I think that whole pack of foam only cost me about $12. There's enough there to make squillions of rollers. You could use it just on flat surfaces too. You could just make a texture plate on a piece of fairly solid cardboard. There you go, that's 3 done. Now there's quite a few gaps there, so I'll probably cut some other bits up and add them into those gaps just so I've got a fuller pattern when I roll it. But I might have a think about that. There you go, 2 done. Now this third one, again, I've gone for a bit of a straight line effect, but I've cut each strip on the diagonal, so I've got a very long, skinny triangle. I just wanted to have some different thicknesses, and I'm going to arrange it quite randomly on the tube. Again, trying to create an interesting pattern that will repeat. I think I get about probably 4 or 5 repeats on a tube that size, maybe 4, depending on the size of your plate. But they're quite wide, those tubes too, so I found they'll be really good for my wide jelly plate, which is more an A3 size. So you can see I'm sort of just popping it on. It almost looks a little bit like, I don't know, bark or a log or something like that. But wherever you can see the foam, that's the place where the paint will be removed from the jelly plate. And wherever there's no foam, that's where the paint will be left on the jelly plate. So there we go. There's number 3. I think I'm looking quite happy with that one. You can see I'm sticking a few little bits in if there's any big gaps I wasn't happy with. So there we go, 3 different rolling texture plates, and now let's have a look how they work. So this one, I'm actually using some acrylic gouache, which is really nice to use on the jelly plate. I don't use it all the time. Now I'm just rolling it up at the edge, so I roll it over the edge of the jelly plate to start with, and I'm keeping a fairly firm pressure on the roller. I don't want to push it down so hard that it squishes right down to the actual cardboard roll. Now, as you can see, that's the first roll I've done with that one, and it hasn't taken all the paint off the plate. So I'm letting that first purple layer dry and now applying another layer of white paint, and that's the layer of paint that I'll use to pull the print. I do use the hairdryer just to dry it off a bit. Try and use your hairdryer on low heat. And there we go. So you can see it's quite a subtle pattern there, but I like to have some subtle patterns in my artwork. Now this time I'm going to use it the second time. Make sure the paint on the roller is dried, so you can do that with a hairdryer. But you'll notice when I do it this time that it actually removes a bit more of the paint. So I've found that doing a couple of rolls with the texture roller, it will remove a bit more paint. So again, I'm just keeping a reasonable pressure on the roller as I'm rolling it. Now, if you were clever, you'd put gloves on so you don't end up with your hands covered in paint. But I just find taking gloves off and putting them on a bit of a nuisance, so I just wash my hands in between. Now, can you see there? Oh yeah, dirty hands for a start. But can you see that the gaps are quite a bit clearer? So a lot more paint's been taken off the plate. So I think once the plate builds up with some paint, it tends to remove more of the paint. I'm just adding a fairly transparent layer of yellow over that purple. I quite like the purple yellow complementary colour palette. And here we go. A little bit more of a defined pattern than in that first one. Probably because of the two colours, the two contrasting colours that I chose as well, but there's so many different ways that you can use it. But I love that repeating pattern. You can see some parts picked up the paint a bit more than others. So that's what the Liquitex acrylic gouache looks like. It's really nice to use, and I love the little applicator bottles that make it easy to use as well. So I think I've got a couple of samples. Yeah, there's the darker one there. But lovely repeat pattern that'll be torn up into nice petals. Now this is the rounder, more florally looking design that I've done. That's how it works. So again, this is the first time that I've used it, so I'm expecting that not quite as much paint will be pulled up. I love that colour. Okay, so start off the edge and I roll it over the edge just so that I get the pattern on the entire jelly plate. And you can see that I'm rolling it quite slowly with some pressure, giving the roller time to pick up the paint. There we go. Oh, look at that pretty swirly pattern. It does look like, does look florally. Dry that off a little bit before I put the next layer of paint on. And then pull that print. Pink and green, another good complementary colour palette. So just pop that on while that layer of paint is wet. Let it dry. Press it down so that every part of the paper is touching the plate. You might need to use your hairdryer just to speed up the drying process. And there we go, a nice pattern. And the beauty of these rollers is they'll be able to use again and again and again, which I love. And I'm using up the cardboard rolls. Sustainable art, I love it. Into my favourite colour pink. So again, start off the edge, roll over the edge of the jelly plate. Nice slow pace. You can see the paint's coming off very well there. Oh, except for that little middle bit, for some reason that's not picked up all the paint as well. You could roll the plate, the roller onto a clean piece of paper and get a print that way as well. I'm not sure how much paint would come off. And I'm just going to use some different colours to make a bit of a different coloured background for this one. Getting a nice smooth finish before I add some matte medium, because I'm going to use tissue paper to pull this print with one of my joggle stencils. This one's called Bunch of Flowers, one of 6 stencils that I've recently designed. You can get those at joggles.com. So as you can see, the tissue paper, you can see right through and see exactly what's going to happen there. So I pressed it down into all the little grooves, dry it off with the hairdryer. And then when I pull that off, I'm going to have some transparent bits in the middle. See, in the middle of my flowers? So that'll look lovely laid over the top of something on my artwork, and I'll be able to see through that. That's why I use the matte medium and not another layer of paint to pull that print, because I wanted to keep some of that transparency on the tissue paper. There we go. Now the beauty about Gelli prints is you get your first print, but then you can get a really lovely, what we call a ghost print. So there's still quite a bit of paint left on there. So I really like combining different things. So I've combined the roller and a stencil to come up with something a little bit different. Now when I pull this print, I'll get the outline of the flowers. Another thing I love about Gelli printing is you're never quite sure what you're going to get until you pull it up. Yeah, that's pretty. Look at that. It's almost like little zebra striped in the outline. So there's your two different prints. Would look lovely together. And there's a third one that we did. I'm happy with that one. I'll use that a lot, I think. And lucky last, the third roller that we made was the brick-like pattern, or the straight line pattern. So rolling it over the edge, and I've used this one a couple of times, so I think this should pull the paint up quite well. Yeah, look at that. Look at all the different gaps staggered in different positions. If I'd started them all in the same place, it wouldn't look nearly as good. Clean the hands off. Just a bit of a wet rag usually gets all the paint off quite easily. Now I'm trying the third complementary colour palette, orange and blue, that's quite a greyish blue that I've made there. But it should contrast really well with the orange, and I should be able to see the pattern quite easily. So not quite as subtle as the first purple one that I made. Okay, dry it off. Make sure it's dry before you pull it. And there we go. Yeah, nice and clear. Look at that. Love that. So there you go. 3 different rollers. Hope you enjoyed that, and have fun making your own rolling texture plates.